Spartacus, House of Ashur, 2025, full details, plot, cast and everything you need to know. Overview. Spartacus, House of Ashur is an American historical drama television series that arrived in December 2025 as the long-awaited return of one of the most brutal and beloved franchises in television history. The show was created by Stephen S. DeKnight, the same mind who built the original Spartacus universe more than a decade earlier with Spartacus, Blood and Sand, Spartacus, Gods of the Arena, Spartacus, Vengeance and Spartacus, War of the Damned. This new installment is produced in the United States through DeKnight Productions in partnership with Lionsgate Television, and it originally aired on the premium cable network STARZ, the same home that hosted the earlier chapters of the Spartacus saga. The series is set in the world of ancient Rome, specifically around the city of Capua, and it belongs to the historical drama and sword and sandal genre, mixing political intrigue, gladiatorial combat, and the kind of stylized, blood-soaked visual language that made the original show iconic among fans of the genre. What makes House of Ashur different from everything that came before it is the bold decision to step away from the story of Spartacus himself and instead build an entire series around one of his most notorious enemies, the cunning and treacherous Ashur, played once again by Nick E. Tarabe. Ashur was originally killed on Mount Vesuvius during the events of Spartacus, Vengeance, but House of Ashur reimagines that moment entirely, presenting a fictional alternate timeline in which Ashur survives that fateful battle and is rewarded for his betrayal rather than punished for it. This premise alone signals that the show is not a direct continuation of the original story but rather a bold reinvention, a what-if scenario that allows the writers to explore an entirely new direction for the franchise while still keeping the tone, the violence, and the political scheming that defined the earlier seasons. The origin of the idea and why Ashur was chosen. The return of the Spartacus franchise had been rumored and discussed for years before it finally became official. The announcement that the series was being revived came in February 2023, and the title of the new show was revealed later that same year in November. From the very beginning, the creative team made it clear that this would not simply be a retelling of the Spartacus story or a direct sequel following the same characters from where the original left off. Instead, the decision was made to build a spin-off around Ashur, a character many fans of the original series remembered as one of the most fascinating villains in the entire show. Ashur was never a hero. He was manipulative, self-serving, physically disadvantaged compared to the other gladiators, and constantly scheming to climb the social ladder through betrayal and cunning rather than brute strength. Choosing him as the central figure of a new series was a daring move because it meant asking audiences to spend an entire season following a character who spent the original show being despised. The premise imagines a world where Ashur did not die on Vesuvius and instead is gifted the very gladiator school once owned by Quintus Lentulus Basiatus, the same Ludus that had once enslaved and humiliated him. In this new position of power, Ashur becomes the Dominus, the owner and master of his own house of gladiators, a role he never could have imagined for himself in the original series. The showrunner has spoken about how this concept allows the writers to dig deeper into questions of power, ambition, and what happens when someone who was once at the very bottom of Roman society suddenly finds himself holding authority over the lives of others. It is a story about transformation, but not necessarily a story about redemption, since Ashur remains just as calculating and self-interested as he always was, only now he has the resources and the position to act on his ambitions in far more dangerous ways. Full plot details. The story of Spartacus, House of Ashur begins with Ashur waking up with no memory of his downfall during the events of Spartacus, Vengeance. He finds himself, almost as if by fate, in possession of the former house of Basiatus, now renamed the House of Ashur in his honor. This sudden shift in status is both a gift and a burden, because Ashur understands that respect and power in Roman society are never given freely, they must be earned and constantly defended. Eager to prove himself worthy of his new position, Ashur sets out to create something new and unforgettable in the arena, something that will separate his ludus from every other gladiator school in Capua and force the Roman elite to take him seriously. This ambition leads him to Aquileia, a fierce and skilled female fighter who becomes central to his plans. Aquileia struggles throughout the early episodes to adapt to the brutal and unforgiving life of a gladiator in training, but her talent and determination quickly make her one of the most compelling figures in the story. Together, Ashur and Aquileia begin to challenge the traditional expectations of the arena, presenting spectacles that defy convention and unsettle the powerful families who see Ashur's rise as an insult to the old order. As the season progresses, Ashur must navigate the treacherous and often deadly waters of Roman politics, a world where alliances shift constantly and betrayal is always lurking just beneath the surface. He faces internal challenges from within his own house, including tension with Chorus, a rival figure who tests Ashur's authority and forces him to prove that his control over the ludus is not as fragile as some may believe. Ashur also finds himself racing against time to secure a place in the Ludi Apollinaris, a major gladiatorial games event, before the arrival of Marcus Crassus, one of the most powerful and dangerous men in Rome. This deadline adds a constant sense of urgency to the season, as Ashur understands that failure to establish his reputation before Crassus arrives could mean the end of everything he has built. Aquileia's presentation to the public becomes one of the pivotal moments of the story, as she faces her first true battle in the arena and begins to earn a reputation of her own, separate from her association with Ashur. Ashur's popularity within Capua grows significantly as the season unfolds, but this success does not come without cost, and the story makes clear that every gain Ashur experiences is balanced by loss, danger, or moral compromise. Later episodes introduce Caesar and his wife Cornelia, who take over Ashur's villa in a development that becomes a significant source of tension and frustration for him, forcing him to reassert his position even as new political players enter his world. Chorus eventually demands blood in a direct challenge to Ashur's leadership, and Ashur is forced to sway an enemy toward his cause in order to protect what he has built. Aquileia, meanwhile, prepares for her return to the arena even as Ashur faces a devastating setback that threatens to undo much of what he has accomplished throughout the season. The show blends personal drama, political maneuvering, and brutal arena combat throughout its 10-episode run, staying true to the tone of the original Spartacus series while carving out its own distinct identity through Ashur's perspective as a man who was once a victim and is now, however uneasily, a master. Cast and characters. The series is led by Nick E. Tarabe, reprising his role as Ashur, the cunning former slave turned Dominus whose journey forms the backbone of the entire show. Graham McTavish plays Chorus, a formidable presence who becomes one of the central sources of conflict and rivalry within the house of Ashur. Tanika Davis stars as Aquileia, the skilled gladiatrix whose rise in the arena becomes one of the most important threads of the season. Claudia Black appears as Casusha, adding to the political and dramatic weight of the story. The cast also includes Jamaica Vaughn, Ivana Bakuro, Lee Gill, Jordy Weber, and India Shaw Smith, each contributing to the wide ensemble of characters that populate the world of Capua and its surrounding political landscape. The composer Joseph LaDuca returns to provide the score, bringing a musical continuity that connects this new series back to the sound and atmosphere of the original Spartacus episodes. Behind the camera, executive producers Stephen S. DeKnight, Rick Jacobson, and Aaron Helbing oversee the production, while Karen Bailey and Jocelyn Sabos serve as producers, ensuring the series maintains the scale and intensity that fans of the franchise have come to expect. Release date and production details. Spartacus, House of Ashur premiered on STARZ on December 5, 2025, marking the official return of the franchise after a 10-year absence from television screens. The season consists of 10 episodes, each running between 51 and 63 minutes, and the show concluded its first season run on February 6, 2026. The series carries a TVMA rating due to its graphic violence, intense combat sequences, and mature themes, staying consistent with the tone that defined the earlier Spartacus shows. Critically, the series performed well upon release, earning a strong 91% average score among critics, even though audience reception was more divided, reflecting the mixed reactions that often accompany bold reinventions of beloved franchises. Despite the strong critical reception, STARZ made the decision to cancel the series after its first season in May 2026, a move that surprised many fans given that the showrunner had already mapped out plans for multiple future seasons and had reportedly completed writing for a second season before the cancellation was announced. Following the cancellation, the rights to the series moved to Lionsgate, which had previously partnered with STARZ before the two companies ended their working relationship in 2025. Lionsgate has since been reported to be shopping the series to other platforms, leaving open the possibility that Spartacus, House of Ashur could continue its story elsewhere in the future, even though nothing has been confirmed as of now. Trailer information. The trailer for Spartacus, House of Ashur was released ahead of its December premiere and immediately set the tone for what audiences could expect from the new series. It showcased the visual style fans remember from the original show, including the same stylized combat choreography, dramatic slow-motion arena sequences, and intense color grading that gave the franchise its distinct identity. The trailer also introduced audiences to Ashur in his new role as Dominus, emphasizing the strange and uncomfortable position he now occupies as a man who was once considered weak and cowardly by his fellow gladiators, now standing as the master of the very house that once oppressed him. Footage of Achilea training and eventually stepping into the arena played a significant role in the promotional material, signaling early on that her character arc would be just as important to the story as Ashur's own journey. The marketing campaign leaned heavily into the franchise's reputation for graphic violence and political betrayal, reassuring longtime fans that despite the shift in protagonists, the brutal spirit of the original Spartacus series remained fully intact. Full explanation and why this show matters. What makes Spartacus, House of Ashur such an interesting entry in the franchise is the risk involved in centering an entire series around a character who was never meant to be sympathetic. Ashur, throughout the original Spartacus saga, represented everything that audiences loved to hate. He was disloyal, opportunistic, and willing to sacrifice anyone around him if it meant securing his own survival and advancement. By imagining a timeline where he lives instead of dying on Vesuvius, the writers created an opportunity to examine what someone like Ashur actually does when he finally gets the power he always wanted. Does he change? Does he become a better man now that he holds authority over others? Or does he simply repeat the same patterns of manipulation and self-interest, only now with far greater consequences because of the power at his disposal? This question sits at the heart of the entire season and gives the show a psychological depth that goes beyond simple arena spectacle. The introduction of Achilea as a co-lead also allows the series to explore themes of loyalty, ambition, and survival from a completely different angle, since her journey into the brutal world of gladiatorial combat mirrors, in some ways, the journey Ashur himself once took as a slave trying to prove his worth in a world that saw him as disposable. The political elements of the show, particularly the looming threat of Marcus Crassus and the shifting alliances within Roman society, ground the series in the same kind of high-stakes power struggle that made the original Spartacus so compelling, even as the story moves in a direction the original never explored. Ultimately, Spartacus, House of Ashur stands as both a tribute to the franchise that came before it and a bold attempt to expand that world in a new direction, proving that even a character as reviled as Ashur can carry the weight of an entire series when given the right creative treatment. Whether or not the show continues beyond its first season, it has already left its mark as a fascinating experiment in franchise storytelling, one that dared to ask what happens when the villain survives and inherits the very world that once tried to destroy him. Spartacus, House of Ashur, 2025, the complete story explained from beginning to end. Before diving into the complete story, it helps to understand the foundation this show is built upon. Spartacus, House of Ashur begins with a bold rewriting of history. In the original Spartacus saga, the character of Ashur, a former slave turned gladiator turned conspirator, was killed on Mount Vesuvius during the climactic battle between Spartacus and the forces of Rome. His head was severed in brutal fashion, and he was condemned to suffer for his betrayals in the underworld. This new series opens exactly there, in that underworld, where Ashur is chained and tormented for his corrupt and self-serving actions during his lifetime. It is here that the ghost of Lucretia, the wife of his former master Batiatus, appears before him. She reminds him of everything he was, a despised Syrian slave who clawed his way up from nothing, who briefly became a gladiator, who was elevated into a position of trust as a conspirator, and who ultimately turned against his own brothers in arms when the house of Batiatus collapsed. Lucretia then offers him something extraordinary, a chance to witness an alternate version of his own fate, one in which he did not die on that mountain. In this alternate reality, Ashur aligned himself with Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in the entire Roman Republic, and fought alongside Crassus's brutal enforcer, a young and ambitious Gaius Julius Caesar. Instead of being cut down, Ashur is the one who throws the fatal spear that kills Spartacus, saving Crassus's life in the process and earning himself extraordinary favor. Lucretia tells him that if he wishes to see where that different path would have led him, he need only wake up. And with that, the story of House of Ashur truly begins. The beginning of a new life. Ashur wakes to find himself in an entirely new existence, one where he is no longer a slave or a lowly gladiator but rather the master of his own household. He is shown lying beside two women, a sign of the wealth and status now surrounding him. Outside, his doctor, a scarred and formidable warrior named Chorus, is busy overseeing the training of the Ludus, the very same gladiator school once owned by Quintus Lentulus Batiatus, now rechristened as the House of Ashur. From the outset, it becomes clear that despite his new title of Dominus, Ashur's actual standing among Roman society is precarious at best. He is still viewed as a lowly Syrian by the elite families of Capua, and whatever respect he has earned comes almost entirely from his connection to Crassus rather than any genuine accomplishment of his own. Tension within his own house is immediately apparent as well, since his gladiators are quarrelsome, and his relationship with Chorus is fractious rather than warm. When one of the men insults him by suggesting that he only defeated Spartacus by attacking him from behind, Ashur responds by challenging him to single combat, quickly and viciously defeating him with a blade despite his own reputation as a weaker fighter in his gladiator days. When the man later breaks a cup in a moment of frustration, Ashur kills him outright, a brutal demonstration of his need to assert dominance in a house that does not yet respect him. As the first chapter unfolds, Ashur discovers just how weak his position truly is. His Ludus produces consistently underwhelming fighters, and in a moment meant to prove a point about the caliber of his men, Ashur ends up killing the most promising gladiator in his own stable with his own hands. This backfires spectacularly, since it leaves him with an even thinner roster of talent heading into a season where he desperately needs a way to distinguish himself in front of Roman high society. Making matters worse, the one fighter Ashur had been quietly grooming to become his champion is later killed in an almost comedic fashion by a trio of diminutive performers hired for entertainment, a humiliation that only deepens the mockery aimed at the House of Ashur among the city's elite. However, this failure inadvertently teaches Ashur something valuable. He realizes that Roman audiences have grown tired of watching the same kind of gladiator fight in the same predictable way, and that what he desperately needs is novelty, something no other Ludus in Capua can offer. He finds his answer while visiting the slave markets, where he encounters a woman with an unmistakable ferocity and skill hidden beneath her circumstances. This woman will soon be given the name Achillea, and Ashur immediately senses that she may be the key to everything he has been missing. The making of a gladiatrix. Achillea's introduction to the house of Ashur marks one of the most significant turning points of the entire story. Ashur brings her into his ludus as a trainee, staking his hopes for fame and political relevance almost entirely on her shoulders. She proves herself to be an extraordinarily capable fighter, but the very fact of her gender makes her deeply unwelcome among the other gladiators, who see the idea of a woman competing for freedom on the sands as an affront to everything they understand about their brutal profession. Achillea is subjected to near constant harassment, and even attempted assault from her fellow trainees, reflecting just how radical and dangerous her position within the ludus truly is. Everything comes to a head when one of the men attempts to force himself on her, and Achillea responds with shocking and immediate violence, mutilating her attacker in graphic fashion. This act of self-defense becomes a turning point in how she is perceived within the house. Chorus, initially skeptical of her presence, ends up challenging her to a duel, partly out of genuine curiosity about her abilities and partly as a way of testing whether she deserves any measure of respect. During their bout, Achillea manages to draw blood from Chorus, an accomplishment that none of the more experienced male gladiators in the house have ever managed to achieve. This earns her a grudging but very real respect from the doctor, setting her on a path toward becoming something greater than just another trainee. As Achillea's story develops, so too does the wider political web surrounding the house of Ashur. Chorus is sent on what is publicly described as a mission to secure a stable grain supply from a man named Anubis, who oversees the fighting pits, but the true purpose of his trip is far more delicate. He is tasked with quietly courting the affections of a man named Opiter in an effort to secure his endorsement for Ashur's gladiators ahead of an upcoming arena spectacle being organized by a powerful senator named Gabinius, whose wife Casusha despises Ashur with real intensity. Gabinius, for his part, is using Ashur as a pawn in his own scheme, hoping that by drawing him closer he can gain leverage over Ashur's patron Crassus, which he intends to use to broker peace between Crassus and his political rival Pompey, and thereby elevate his own standing within the Republic. Casusha, however, has no interest in cooperating with any plan that benefits Ashur, and she is simultaneously trying to arrange a marriage for her grieving daughter Viridia while quietly working against both her husband's wishes and Ashur's ambitions. During his mission, Chorus finds himself ambushed by a violent thug named Phides and his men, and though Chorus fights his way to safety, it is later revealed that Phides had actually been secretly hired by Casusha herself, who eliminates him at the end of this stretch of the story to keep her involvement hidden. This sets the stage for a season defined by shifting alliances, hidden agendas, and constant political maneuvering beneath the surface of gladiatorial spectacle. Training, betrayal, and the weight of the past. With Chorus away for a stretch of the story, another gladiator named Celadus is temporarily promoted to the role of doctor. Celadus is a former champion of considerable renown who has been humbled by circumstance into training a group of largely inept and arrogant fighters, and he takes to the responsibility with a sharp, commanding presence. Working alongside Ashur, Celadus helps push Achillea toward reaching her full potential as a fighter. It becomes clear that Achillea is deeply haunted by something from her past, a trauma that resurfaces in flashbacks and continues to hinder her performance even as her raw talent becomes increasingly obvious. Eventually, Ashur personally dons gladiator armor to spar with her himself, and through this process he discovers that her preferred fighting style involves wielding two weapons at once rather than relying on a single sword and shield, a revelation that unlocks a dramatic improvement in her abilities. When Ashur formally brands her as a member of his house and publicly silences the other gladiators who continue to mock her presence, it marks a symbolic turning point where Achillea begins to be accepted, however grudgingly, as a genuine member of the house of Ashur. Alongside this training arc, the story deepens its exploration of the complicated relationships forming within Ashur's household. Hilara, a slave woman who also happens to serve as Ashur's vilica overseeing the entire household, shares what appears to be a genuine emotional connection with him despite the fact that he treats her with consistent cruelty, and disregard for her feelings. Her friend Messia harbors unspoken romantic feelings for Hilara and appears willing to exploit Ashur's own desires and appetites in an attempt to draw Hilara closer to her, though it remains ambiguous throughout this stretch of the story whether Hilara's continued rejection of these advances stems from her own preferences or from a calculated desire to keep Ashur's favor entirely for herself. Meanwhile, Ashur receives an unexpected and vague warning that his patron Crassus intends to visit the house of Ashur, though no specific date is given. This sends Ashur into a spiral of frantic overspending as he tries to project an image of wealth and success worthy of his patron's attention, despite Hilara's repeated warnings that the household cannot sustain this level of extravagance indefinitely. Desperate to have some genuine accomplishment to show for himself by the time Crassus arrives, Ashur pushes his gladiators harder than ever and makes 2 separate trips to the city markets, the first of which ends in public humiliation when he is pelted with fruit while attempting to provoke a rival ludus. It is during his second trip to the market, this time accompanied by Chorus, that Ashur stumbles into an entirely unexpected opportunity. The 2 men happen upon an attack orchestrated by what appear to be Cilician pirates attempting to kidnap Cassutia and her daughter Viridia. In the chaos, one of their attendants is gruesomely killed, but Ashur and Chorus manage to arrive just in time to save both women from harm. Grateful beyond measure, Cassutia and Viridia bring Ashur before Gabinius to receive a formal reward, appearing to finally grant him the access to the upcoming games that he has been chasing throughout the entire story so far. Yet just as it seems Ashur's fortunes are about to change for the better, it is not Crassus who finally arrives at his villa but rather Caesar himself, a man Ashur immediately finds himself getting along with far less comfortably than he had hoped, setting the stage for a far more complicated and dangerous dynamic than the one he had originally been preparing for. Caesar's arrival and the growing web of deception. Caesar's presence in the house of Ashur, accompanied by his wife Cornelia, immediately begins to reshape the entire political landscape of the story. It is soon revealed that the supposed pirate attack on Cassutia and Viridia was never a random act of banditry at all but rather a carefully orchestrated scheme engineered by Caesar himself, carried out with the blessing of Crassus and with secret assistance from Opater. The entire purpose of the staged attack was to manufacture a situation in which Ashur, and by extension Crassus, could be granted a position within Gabinius's upcoming games that would not otherwise have been available to them, all part of a much larger scheme to pull Gabinius away from his alliance with Pompey and toward Crassus instead. Caesar goes on to charm Gabinius directly, securing not only Ashur's inclusion in the games but also convincing Gabinius to co-host the event and to place Ashur's chosen champion in the Primus, the most prestigious and dangerous position of the entire spectacle. It becomes painfully clear to Ashur just how effortlessly Caesar is able to accomplish in mere minutes what Ashur himself has been struggling and scheming to achieve across the entire season, a humiliating realization that nonetheless leaves him no real choice but to continue playing along, since so much now depends on the outcome of the coming games. All of Ashur's hopes now rest squarely on Achillea's shoulders. She is officially named champion of the House of Ashur and given the dramatic title of Goddess of Death, a bold and deliberately provocative branding decision on Ashur's part designed to generate maximum attention. Her introduction to Roman high society does not go smoothly, drawing scorn and disbelief from Gabinius and the assembled senators and their wives, who cannot fathom the idea of a woman standing as a house champion. Yet the fickle nature of the Roman crowd means that everything hinges on whether Achillea can prove herself decisively when the games finally begin. In the lead-up to the spectacle, a web of personal betrayals and alliances continues to form throughout the house. Tarshan, one of the more arrogant and self-serving gladiators, pretends to support Achillea publicly while secretly plotting to use the attention surrounding her to eventually challenge and kill her himself in order to claim the title of champion for his own glory. Caesar, meanwhile, continues to work purely toward his own advancement, going so far as to begin referring to Ashur's ludus as the House of Caesar rather than the House of Ashur, a deliberate and stinging insult. Within the household, Messia continues to remind Hilara of how poorly Ashur treats her, all while nursing her own agenda after being rejected twice. Opiter's affection for Chorus continues to deepen, though Proclus, a rival figure with growing influence, witnesses their intimacy and files it away as potential leverage for the future. Perhaps most unexpectedly, Achillea and Celadus begin to develop a quiet romantic connection on the eve of the games, a bond that carries the potential to create further friction with Tarshan, who happens to be Celadus's own son. Ashur also discovers an unlikely and increasingly important ally in Viridia, Casusha's daughter. Still grateful to Ashur for saving her life earlier, Viridia comes to genuinely admire the political audacity of elevating a woman to the position of arena champion, and she quickly recognizes that Caesar is quietly benefiting from all of Ashur's hard work and risk. There is an unmistakable spark of chemistry between Ashur and Viridia that develops throughout this stretch of the story, a connection that does not go unnoticed by Hilara. When the day of the games finally arrives, two major fights unfold in the arena. In the first, Tarshan and Celadus manage to scrape through a difficult bout against a rival pairing, though largely in spite of Tarshan's reckless, glory-seeking approach rather than because of any real teamwork. The second and far more consequential fight sees Achillea thrust into the Primus, expected to face off against a pair of brothers known as the Ferox with whom she has feuded throughout the build-up to the games. However, Gabinius makes a last-minute and deliberately cruel change, forcing Achillea to instead face an enormous opponent, clearly hoping that pitting her against such an overwhelming physical threat will result in her death, and thereby embarrass Ashur for having orchestrated the entire spectacle in the first place. Against all expectations, Achillea emerges victorious, though the victory comes at a devastating cost, leaving her with what appears to be a severe head injury and a sword hand that has been nearly severed in the fighting. It is a hard-fought and costly win, but for once in the entire story so far, something has genuinely gone in Ashur's favor. The cost of victory in a house in crisis. In the aftermath of Achillea's brutal victory, the story shifts its focus inward to the house of Ashur itself, as Achillea lies gravely injured and hovering near death from the wounds sustained in the Primus. With the action largely confined to the Ludus during this stretch, the primary conflict becomes a tournament held to determine who among Ashur's remaining gladiators will stand in as interim champion while Achillea recovers, if she recovers at all. It is here that the story turns its focus toward Chorus and his relationship with Opiter, which has continued to deepen into something that feels increasingly genuine rather than merely strategic. When Ashur, panicking over what Achillea's potential death might mean for his already fragile political standing, violently disposes of his own medicus for delivering bad news about the state of her wounded hand, Chorus is dispatched to ask Opiter for the loan of his own physician. This request opens the door to a dramatic new chain of events. Opiter reveals to Chorus that he was the one who helped orchestrate the staged pirate attack on Casusha and Viridia, and admits that he now fears for his own life because of what he knows, prompting him to make plans to leave Capua entirely. He does send a Greek-speaking physician to help treat Achillea, but the entire episode leaves Chorus even more disturbed by just how much scheming has been happening behind his back throughout the season. Back at the villa, Cornelia continues to make life difficult for Ashur, flaunting her family's status, sleeping with his slaves in his own baths, and generally treating his hospitality with open contempt. Beneath her provocations, however, lies a deliberate scheme of her own, as she works to manipulate Casusha into marrying Viridia off to an ally of Caesar's named Quintus Thermus, a plan that Ashur ultimately manages to help sabotage once he learns of it, partly out of his own growing feelings for Viridia and partly as an opportunity to weaken Caesar's influence. At the same time, the relationship between Chorus and Opiter reaches an unexpected crossroads when Opiter offers to grant Chorus his freedom, along with his villa, his ludus, and all of his gladiators, in exchange for Ashur agreeing to release Chorus from his service so they can leave the city together. It is a remarkable, almost fairy tale opportunity for Chorus, and Ashur, despite his reluctance to lose his doctor, recognizes what an extraordinary deal it represents for his own fortunes as well. But true to his character, Ashur's ego ultimately undermines the entire arrangement when he cannot resist bragging to Proclus about how much his own standing will improve once he takes possession of Opiter's holdings. This careless boast has catastrophic consequences. In the dead of night, the surviving members of the Ferox brothers, acting on Proculus's orders, break into Opiter's villa, slaughter his household staff, and brutally kill Opiter himself, shattering Chorus's hopes for a peaceful life outside the arena and leaving Ashur once again worse off than before, entirely because of his own inability to keep his triumphs to himself. Amid all this turmoil, there is at least one moment of grace, as Achillea finally stirs from her feverish nightmares and shows the first real signs that she may yet survive her injuries. Revenge and realignment. Opiter's brutal murder sends shockwaves through the house of Ashur, and the story that follows is defined by grief curdling into a thirst for vengeance. Chorus, devastated by the loss of the man he had allowed himself to love, initially suspects that Caesar and Cornelia may have orchestrated the killing, based on staged evidence meant to implicate Cilician raiders once again. However, it is soon revealed that Caesar and Cornelia are, for once, entirely innocent of the accusations leveled against them, forcing Ashur to confront an uncomfortable truth. It was his own boastful indiscretion that led directly to Opiter's death. Faced with no other choice, Ashur admits the full truth to Chorus, and the two men form an uneasy alliance to investigate what really happened and to bring the true culprits to justice. Complicating matters further, Opiter's considerable holdings are set to be auctioned off, and Ashur becomes desperate to secure the funds needed to win the bidding, going so far as to strike bargains, manipulate Cornelia, and even revisit the very marriage arrangement for Viridia that he had previously helped scuttle, all in an increasingly tangled effort to raise the necessary money. Ashur's scheme to secure the auction funds ultimately collapses in humiliating fashion when Casusha reveals to Cornelia that Ashur had already worked to undermine the Quintus Thermus marriage plan, prompting Cornelia to withdraw her financial backing at the worst possible moment, just as Ashur has placed the highest bid against his rival Proclus. Yet from this failure emerges an unlikely alliance, as Casusha, revealing a depth of grief over Opiter's death that surprises everyone including herself, agrees to help Ashur set a trap for Proclus, whom Ashur now firmly believes to be responsible for orchestrating the entire assassination. The trap works exactly as intended. Proclus, believing he has been offered a chance to eliminate Ashur once and for all, sends the surviving Ferox brother along with a group of hired men to carry out the ambush. Though Ashur arrives prepared with reinforcements of his own, it is Chorus who ultimately proves decisive, single-handedly cutting down the entire group of attackers in a display of ferocious, cathartic violence. He spares only one man, a fighter named Satyrus, sending him back to Proclus with an unmistakable message that the house of Ashur is coming for him in the arena, and that Chorus intends to reclaim his old position as doctor. Ashur and Chorus shake hands over their shared purpose, marking one of the story's few moments of genuine, uncomplicated triumph. Meanwhile, back at the Ludus, Celadus works to help Achillea adapt her fighting style to compensate for her badly damaged hand, encouraging her to embrace a spear and small shield combination that plays to her strengths, though her unresolved trauma, tied to a devastating memory involving her own daughter, continues to hinder her performance whenever those painful memories resurface during combat. Loss, grief, and the return to the sands. With Chorus reinstated as doctor, Celadus finds himself pushed back into the role of active gladiator, a development that immediately raises the stakes for his safety within the story. This anxiety proves well-founded. Tarshan, still driven by jealousy and ambition, deliberately aggravates Achillea's healing hand during a training exchange in order to force his own father Celadus back into the position of house champion, since Achillea is left unable to compete. Amid ongoing tension with Proclus, who remains furious over the deaths of his men, Celadus is sent into the arena to fight in Achillea's stead during a spectacle largely organized by Gabinius. It is here that the story delivers one of its most gut-wrenching moments. Celadus is pitted against a towering female Scythian warrior who has emerged as Proculus's own answer to Achillea, a fighter specifically cultivated to steal Ashur's signature innovation and turn it against him. The fight is brutal and one-sided, and Celadus is killed, his attention seemingly divided until the very end by his continued concern for his troubled son Tarshan watching from beyond the gates. This loss devastates the entire household, particularly Chorus, who has now lost both a lover and a trusted friend within a short span of the story, and it sets up a clear and inevitable path toward a climactic confrontation between Achillea and the Scythian once Achillea has recovered enough to fight again. In the emotional aftermath of Celadus's death, the story allows itself a rare and unexpected moment of genuine character growth. Tarshan, for all his arrogance and cruelty throughout the season, is shown grieving his father's death with real and unguarded sincerity, insisting on preparing his body alone for funeral rites. Though this initially seems to deepen the rift between Tarshan and Achillea, who is denied the chance to say her own goodbye to a man she had grown close to, their shared grief and shared desire for vengeance against the Scythian gradually begin to draw them together. When Pompey visits the house of Ashur, Achillea and Tarshan are given the opportunity to settle their long-simmering rivalry in a sparring match meant to impress their powerful guest, and Achillea emerges victorious, even choosing to spare Tarshan's life against explicit instruction, a gesture that begins to genuinely thaw the animosity between them. Elsewhere in the story, the political situation grows increasingly dangerous, as Pompey's planned marriage to Viridia threatens to undo much of the progress Crassus and Caesar have made in courting Gabinius's favor. Caesar arrives with a ruthless solution, informing Ashur that if Gabinius were to die, Pompey would likely lose interest in the marriage altogether, and Ashur, under the explicit threat of losing Crassus's patronage entirely, is left with no real choice but to comply. Reluctant to simply murder Gabinius outright, both for moral reasons and because doing so could permanently ruin his chances with Viridia, Ashur devises an alternative scheme. He arranges for Achillea to drug Pompey during a private meeting, using poison secretly stolen by Messia at Hilara's request. During this encounter, Achillea shares a piece of her own painful backstory, revealing that she was sold into slavery by her own father after accidentally killing a member of royalty she had been sworn to protect, an act that would have carried a death sentence had she not been handed over to Roman slavers instead. With Pompey drugged, Gabinius is lured to Ashur's villa under the belief that he is meeting with Pompey directly, only to discover Pompey in a compromising and incriminating position with Achillea. The plan very nearly works exactly as intended, with a furious Gabinius immediately calling off the proposed marriage. However, the scheme unravels when Gabinius lingers too long in his outrage, giving the still disoriented Pompey enough time to stagger back to his feet and deny any wrongdoing. As the confrontation escalates, an enraged Pompey draws his sword and slashes Gabinius, leaving him gravely wounded. Caesar quickly spirits Pompey away from the scene, while Ashur is left to care for the dying Gabinius. In a moment of devastating irony, Cornelia loudly praises Ashur's deception within earshot of the wounded senator, revealing the truth of what has just transpired. Even mortally wounded, Gabinius attempts to attack Ashur in his fury, forcing Ashur, with visible anguish and reluctance, to smother him to death with his own hands, ending the life of a man who had, in his own strange way, come to respect him. The finale and where everything stands. With Gabinius dead and his death conveniently pinned on Pompey, Crassus's political standing rises dramatically, while Gabinius's holdings and household pass into the control of his cruel and thoroughly detestable brother, Servius. Servius wastes no time asserting his dominance over everyone around him, treating both Casutia and Viridia with open contempt and forcing them into humiliating circumstances within their own household. He organizes a set of funeral games in Gabinius's honor, and deliberately bans Ashur's gladiators from participating, with the sole exception of Achilles, who is set to face the Scythian in the Primus as the centerpiece of the entire spectacle. He even goes so far as to ban Ashur from the Pulvinus, the elevated viewing box reserved for dignitaries, purely as an act of public humiliation. Despite this exclusion, Servius's cruelty toward Cassutia and Viridia only pushes both women further towards sympathy for Ashur, suggesting a shifting alliance that may well carry consequences beyond the events of this first season. In the lead-up to the climactic Primus, the story dedicates considerable time to training montages showing both Achilles and the Scythian preparing for their confrontation, while also delivering some of the most meaningful character development the show has offered for Tarshan throughout the entire season. Fully committed to honoring his late father's memory, Tarshan dedicates himself completely to helping prepare Achilles for her fight, following Chorus's guidance to temper his once combative approach, and even turning away his own on-again, off-again lover after she disrespects Celadus's memory, a clear sign of just how much he has grown since the season began. With Ashur's other gladiators barred from competing, only 2 fights within the funeral games carry any real weight. The first involves Satyrus, once again managing to survive against seemingly impossible odds by reluctantly teaming up with an unfamiliar fighter to defeat a massive hammer-wielding opponent. The second and far more significant fight is, of course, the long-anticipated showdown between Achilles and the Scythian, an explosive and chaotic battle that spills beyond the boundaries of the arena itself and into the surrounding crowd before finally concluding with Achilles emerging triumphant, avenging Celadus's death without any outside interference, and earning the full-throated support of Chorus, Tarshan, and the rest of the gladiators watching from the sidelines. In the emotional aftermath of her victory, Achilles and Tarshan share an intimate and tender moment together in her new private quarters, a space once occupied by legendary champions like Gannicus and, in the original timeline, Spartacus himself, before ultimately choosing to spend the night together, a development that carries its own complicated emotional weight given their shared history with Celadus. Elsewhere, Messia, disturbed and disillusioned by her unwitting involvement in the plot against Pompey and Gabinius, departs Capua for Rome alongside Cornelia, leaving Caesar behind to continue pursuing his own ambitions within the city. Having played his part in Crassus's political machinations, Ashur had been promised control over Capua's rebuilt arena as his reward, but Caesar gleefully informs him that Crassus has ultimately decided against granting him this position after all, one final and deeply personal betrayal that finally proves to be the breaking point for Ashur's patience. What follows is a ferocious, no-holds-barred confrontation between Ashur and Caesar that tears through the villa itself, and in a moment of stunning, crowd-pleasing catharsis, Ashur emerges victorious, brutally hacking apart Caesar's face in the process, and smugly declaring his triumph over the man who has spent the entire season quietly stealing credit for his every hard-won accomplishment. The season closes on this defiant, blood-soaked note, leaving almost every major political thread of the story deliberately unresolved. Whether Ashur will be able to survive the consequences of killing one of the most powerful and dangerous men in Rome remains an open question, one that showrunner Stephen S. DeKnight has reportedly already mapped out in scripts for a potential second season, even though the show's future beyond its first run has remained genuinely uncertain following its cancellation. What makes this complete story so compelling from beginning to end is the way it consistently refuses to let its central character off the hook. Ashur never becomes a hero in any conventional sense. He remains manipulative, self-interested, and prone to catastrophic errors of ego throughout every single episode, and yet the story finds a way to make his journey toward power both fascinating and, at times, almost sympathetic, precisely because everyone around him in this brutal, backstabbing version of Rome is playing exactly the same game, just with better breeding and more inherited privilege. Achilles' parallel journey, from an anonymous, traumatized woman purchased at a slave market to the celebrated, undefeated champion of an entire ludus, gives the story its emotional backbone, while the shifting loyalties of characters like Chorus, Tarshan, Cassutia, and Viridia ensure that no alliance in this world ever feels permanent or entirely safe. By the time the credits roll on the finale, the House of Ashur has survived betrayal, assassination, forbidden romance, devastating loss, and open warfare with some of the most powerful men in Rome, and Ashur himself stands, bloodied but unbroken, having proven that even a man once considered the lowest of the low can claw his way to the very heart of Roman power, one brutal, calculated decision at a time. The actors behind Spartacus, House of Ashur complete life stories and career journeys. The cast of Spartacus, House of Ashur brings together performers from all over the world, each carrying their own remarkable personal history long before they ever stepped onto the blood-soaked sands of Capua. From a Lebanese immigrant who once folded clothes at a luxury boutique in New York to a Scottish stage actor who grew up moving from country to country with his aviation father, from a Spanish child star who once beat out 1,000 other girls for a legendary fantasy role to a Canadian model-turned-taekwondo champion. The ensemble of this series represents one of the most globally diverse casts in the entire Spartacus franchise. Understanding who these performers are and where they came from adds a whole new layer of appreciation for what they bring to the screen. Nikki Tarabay, the man behind Ashur. At the very center of this series stands Nikki Tarabay, the actor who has now played Ashur across multiple installments of the Spartacus universe. Tarabay was born Nick Ahmad Tarabay in Beirut, Lebanon, into a large and close-knit family. His parents remained in Lebanon throughout his life, along with his younger brother, and an extensive network of cousins, uncles and aunts, giving him deep roots in Middle Eastern culture even as his career eventually carried him halfway across the world. As a young boy growing up in a strict and disciplined household, Tarabay found an outlet in humor, often trying to lighten the mood around his stern father, and he also developed a genuine passion for soccer that stayed with him well into adulthood. He was energetic and restless as a student, someone for whom traditional academics were often a struggle, but who found real confidence and joy on the football pitch, eventually playing in Lebanon's semi-professional soccer league during his younger years. He has even joked in interviews that he sometimes slept with a soccer ball beside him as a child, a small but telling detail about just how much the sport meant to him. After finishing high school, Tarabay made the life-changing decision to move to New York City in pursuit of a completely different future. To support himself while he found his footing, he took a job as a clothing salesman, working the floor at high-end retailers including Hugo Boss and Gucci, immersing himself in a world of fashion and presentation that would later serve him well in an industry built on image. During this period he began studying acting seriously at the T. Schreiber Studio, one of New York's respected acting conservatories, and he started building experience through off-Broadway productions, the kind of small, scrappy theater work that so many performers used to hone their craft before ever appearing on a screen. In 2004, seeking greater opportunities, Tarabay relocated once again, this time to Los Angeles, where he continued his training under the well-regarded acting coach Larry Moss and performed in stage productions such as Danny and the Deep Blue Sea. Tarabay's early television career was built the way so many working actors build theirs, through a steady stream of guest appearances on major procedural dramas. He appeared in episodes of CSI Miami across a run that stretched from 2002 to 2012, and he also took on guest roles in Without a Trace and NCIS, two other hugely popular crime series of that era. He continued adding credits with appearances in The Unit, Moonlight, and the STARZ drama Crash, slowly building a reputation as a reliable and versatile performer who could slip into a wide variety of character types. Then, in 2010, everything changed for him when he was cast as Ashur in the original Spartacus, Blood and Sand. The role of a physically disadvantaged former gladiator who survives through cunning, manipulation, and constant scheming rather than brute strength gave Tarabay the opportunity to create one of the most memorable and complex villains in the entire history of STARZ programming. He reprised the role again in the prequel series Spartacus, Gods of the Arena in 2011, cementing Ashur as one of the defining characters of the franchise, right up until his dramatic death on Mount Vesuvius in Spartacus, Vengeance. Following his years on Spartacus, Terabay's career expanded considerably across both television and film. He made his feature film debut playing a Klingon in J. Abrams' Star Trek Into Darkness in 2013, giving him a foothold in one of the biggest science fiction franchises in the world. He went on to guest star in the CW's Arrow, taking on the role of Digger Harkness, also known as Captain Boomerang, across multiple episodes. His television resume continued to grow with appearances in Person of Interest, Longmire, and Castle, and in 2017 he landed a recurring role in the acclaimed science fiction series The Expanse, playing the character Kotyar. In 2018 he took on his biggest film role to date up to that point, appearing in Pacific Rim, Uprising, and he later contributed a voice role to the animated film Wendell and Wild. His television work continued into the 2020s with a recurring role on Stargirl as the villain Eclipso, a guest appearance on MacGyver, and further credits in shows like Motherland, Fort Salem. Beyond live-action work, Terabay has also built up a substantial career in video games, lending his voice and motion capture performance to major titles including Anthem, where he played the character Haluk, and Call of Duty: Modern Warfare, where he portrayed the antagonist known as the Butcher. By the time Spartacus, House of Ashur went into production, Terabay had become one of the busiest character actors working across film, television and games, and the announcement that he would be returning to the role that first made him famous was met with tremendous excitement from longtime fans of the franchise. His career has also included work on Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, representing one of the largest-scale productions he has ever been a part of. In his personal life, Terabay has remained fairly private, never having married and having no children, but he continues to maintain his passion for soccer and has also developed an interest in photography, a hobby he tends to keep largely to himself away from the public eye. His journey from a soccer-loving boy in Beirut to a globally recognized television villain represents one of the more remarkable transformations among the entire cast of the show. Graham McTavish, the Scottish veteran playing Chorus. Graham McTavish, who plays the formidable Dr. Chorus, brings decades of professional experience to House of Ashur, having built one of the most prolific and respected careers among British character actors working today. McTavish was born in Glasgow, Scotland, on January 4, 1961, into a family shaped significantly by his father Alex's career in aviation, which meant that McTavish experienced a childhood full of frequent international relocations. Political discourse was a regular feature of life in the McTavish household, and this environment of movement and conversation seems to have instilled in him both adaptability and a sharp, articulate mind that would later serve him well on stage and screen. He went on to attend Queen Mary University of London, where he earned a degree in English literature, and during his time there he became head of the university's English Society, taking part in several Shakespearean productions each year, an experience that helped refine his dramatic instincts long before he ever considered acting as a full-time profession. McTavish's professional acting career began in earnest with roots firmly planted in the theatre. He performed extensively across the United Kingdom, working with prestigious institutions including the Royal National Theatre, the Royal Court Theatre, and the Royal Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh, as well as regional repertory companies in London's West End and at the Dundee Repertory Theatre, where he worked alongside performers such as Jimmy Logan and Robert Robertson. His first professional acting credit on screen came in 1986, when he appeared in the Disney miniseries Return to Treasure Island. From there, his television career expanded steadily throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, with roles in productions such as For Queen and Country, Freedom Fighter, Highlander, and Merlin, alongside guest appearances on beloved British series including Taggart, Casualty, and The Bill. One of McTavish's most cherished cult roles from this era came through his portrayal of Warden Ackerman in 5 episodes of the long-running British science fiction comedy Red Dwarf, a part that endeared him to generations of British sci-fi fans. His profile continued to rise through the 2000s with roles in Rome, the acclaimed HBO and BBC historical drama, and with an action-heavy turn in 2008's Rambo, in which he starred opposite Sylvester Stallone as the mercenary Lewis, making him one of only a small handful of actors who can claim to have worked opposite both Rocky and Rambo, since he later also appeared in Creed in 2015. His role as the Russian conspirator Mikhail Novakovich on the hit series 24 further raised his international profile heading into the next decade. The true breakthrough of McTavish's career arrived when he was cast as the fierce dwarf warrior Dwalin in Peter Jackson's Hobbit film trilogy, released between 2012 and 2014. The massive worldwide box office success of these films introduced McTavish to an entirely new global audience and cemented his reputation within the world of epic fantasy filmmaking. He followed this with the role of Dougal Mackenzie in the STARZ historical drama Outlander from 2014 to 2016, a part that earned him a passionate fanbase of his own, and he later returned to the Outlander universe in a different role as William Buckley Mackenzie. During this same period he took on the role of the Saint of Killers in AMC's Preacher, based on the cult comic book series by Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon, further building his reputation for playing imposing, morally complex characters. His voice acting career has also flourished substantially, with a standout performance as Vlad Dracula Teeps in the Netflix animated series Castlevania, as well as roles in various Marvel animated projects voicing the trickster god Loki. In the world of video games, McTavish has lent his voice and performance capture talents to the Uncharted series, playing the villainous Zoran Lazarevic in Uncharted 2, Among Thieves, and the character Charlie Cutter in Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception. Beyond acting, McTavish has also become a successful author, co-writing the New York Times best-selling book Clanlands, Whiskey, Warfare, and a Scottish adventure like no other alongside his Outlander co-star Sam Heughan in 2020. Their creative partnership expanded into the popular STARZ travel documentary series Men in Kilts, a road trip with Sam and Graham, as well as follow-up books including the Clanlands Almanac and Clanlands in New Zealand. He has continued adding credits throughout the 2020s, appearing in projects such as Disney's The Finest Hours opposite Chris Pine and Eric Bana, a cameo role as King Atlan in the DC film Aquaman, and more recently a role as Harold Westerling in HBO's House of the Dragon. Deeply proud of his Scottish heritage and his connection to Clan McTavish, Graham McTavish's journey from a peripatetic childhood shaped by his father's aviation career to becoming one of the most recognizable character actors working in modern fantasy and historical television represents nearly 40 years of dedicated craft. Tanika Davis bringing Achillea to life. Tanika Davis, who portrays the groundbreaking character of Achillea, has a career path that began nowhere near a film set. She was born on July 16, 1985 in Toronto, Canada, and raised in the small town of Newmarket, Ontario. From a very young age, Davis showed a clear aptitude for both performance and discipline. At just 10 years old, she discovered a passion for public speaking and the performing arts, entering various speech competitions and building confidence in front of audiences. That same year she also began intensive training in Taekwondo, a martial art in which she excelled almost immediately, going on to compete at a national level in Canada and earning numerous gold medals, trophies and awards throughout her youth for her outstanding abilities in the sport. This early combination of performance skill and physical discipline would prove to be an unusually fitting foundation for the demanding, combat-heavy roles she would eventually land decades later. Davis's professional career actually began in the modeling world rather than traditional acting. She first entered the public eye as a finalist on the first season of the popular reality television series Canada's Next Top Model, where she was ultimately eliminated relatively early in the competition but gained significant exposure in the process. She went on to sign with Ford Models and began transitioning into acting shortly afterward. Her earliest acting credits came through Canadian television, including a role in the sitcom The Kink in My Hair in 2007 and appearances in the TV movie Degrassi Goes Hollywood, as well as episodes of Degrassi, The Next Generation, and The Listener around 2009. Over the following years, Davis became a familiar face across a wide range of Canadian television productions, taking on guest and supporting roles in shows including Skins, Lost Girl, Murdoch Mysteries, and The Book of Negroes. She also appeared in horror films such as Wrong Turn 4, Bloody Beginnings, and the film Debug, gradually building a diverse resume across genres. In 2017, Davis took on the role of Mira in the American science fiction drama Incorporated, adding to her growing list of genre credits, and she remained a steadily working actress throughout the following years with a variety of smaller television roles. Her career took a significant step forward in 2021 when she landed her first major recurring role, playing Petra Small, also known as the Flare 2, in the Netflix superhero series Jupiter's Legacy, portraying the emotionally strained daughter of a legendary hero who must grapple with the weight of inherited expectations and powers. That same year she also appeared in an episode of Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, playing the character Mariana in the installment titled Dreams in the Witch House, connecting her, in a small way, to one of the most celebrated names in genre filmmaking. Davis's casting as Achillea in Spartacus, House of Ashur in 2025 represented the most significant milestone of her career to date, and it carries historic weight within the franchise itself, since Achillea is recognized as the first black female gladiator ever depicted in scripted television. In interviews discussing the role, Davis has spoken about how deeply meaningful this achievement felt to her personally, describing the character as empowering, fierce, and the kind of role model she herself needed to see on screen as a young girl. She has spoken candidly about the sheer physical intensity of the role, describing days of genuine pain and exhaustion during production, but explaining that she welcomed every bit of that difficulty because it helped her channel authentic strength, rage, and resilience into her performance. Her years of taekwondo training as a child proved to be an unexpectedly perfect preparation for the physically demanding choreography required of a leading gladiatrix, and her background in public speaking competitions gave her the confidence and command needed to hold her own opposite established veterans like Nick Tarabay and Graham McTavish. From modeling runways in Toronto to becoming a trailblazing warrior on premium cable television, Tenika Davis's journey reflects years of quiet, disciplined preparation finally converging into a single, history-making role. Claudia Black, the seasoned science fiction star playing Kasusha. Claudia Black, who plays the sharp and scheming Kasusha, arrives at House of Ashur as one of the most experienced and internationally recognized actresses in the entire cast. Born Claudia Lee Black on October 11, 1972, in Sydney, Australia, she grew up in a Jewish family, the daughter of two Australian medical academics, Jules and Judy Black. She was educated at the well-regarded Anglican Kambala School in Sydney, and over the course of her life and career she has lived not only in Australia but also in New Zealand, Spain, England, Canada, and the United States, giving her an unusually broad and cosmopolitan life experience even before accounting for the sheer scope of her professional work. Black began her acting career in her native Australia during the early 1990s, taking on guest roles in local productions including Police Rescue and the long-running series A Country Practice, where she had an early recurring part as Nurse Claire Bonacci. She also appeared in the anthology series 7 Deadly Sins and the American-New Zealand co-production Amazon High. In 1996 she landed a leading role in the New Zealand soap opera City Life, playing a Greek lawyer named Angela Kostopoulos over the course of 26 episodes, a significant early credit that helped establish her as a capable leading performer. During this same period she also made guest appearances in Water Rats and, notably, in the hugely popular fantasy adventure series Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, playing the character Cassandra across a couple of episodes, an early brush with the exact kind of mythic, sword and sandal storytelling that would eventually define much of her later career. The true international breakthrough for Claudia Black came in 1999 when she was cast as Aaron's son in the science fiction series Farscape, an American and Australian co-production created by Rockne S. O'Bannon and produced in collaboration with Jim Henson Productions. Her performance as the tough, complex former peacekeeper officer earned her a dedicated global fanbase and multiple Saturn Award nominations for Best Actress, and she ultimately won the award in 2005 for her work in the continuation miniseries Farscape: The Peacekeeper Wars. Around this same period, Black's film career also gained momentum, with a memorable role as Sharon Shotza Montgomery in the 2000 science fiction horror film Pitch Black alongside Vin Diesel, a production whose filming schedule famously overlapped with her early episodes of Farscape, requiring her to juggle both projects simultaneously. She also appeared in the gothic horror film Queen of the Damned during this stretch of her career. Following the end of Farscape, Black continued building an impressive resume within genre television, taking on the role of Vala Maldoran in Stargate SG-1, joining the long-running franchise as a recurring character before being promoted to a series regular during its 10th and final season, working alongside fellow Farscape alumnus Ben Browder, who had joined the Stargate universe as Cameron Mitchell. Her chemistry with Browder became such a beloved element of the show that the milestone 200th episode included a comedic fantasy sequence explicitly referencing her Farscape role of Erin Sunday. Black has been nominated for 6 Saturn Awards throughout her career, 5 of them for her work on Farscape and 1 for Stargate SG-1. Beyond her live-action television work, Black has become one of the most prolific voice actresses working in video games, lending her voice and performance to major franchise characters including Chloe Frazer in the Uncharted series, the Witch Morrigan in Dragon Age Origins, Admiral Darozen and Matriarch Ethida across the Mass Effect trilogy, and Samantha Byrne throughout multiple entries in the Gears of War franchise. Her additional television credits over the years have included a recurring role as Dahlia in the originals and a starring turn as Dr. Sabine Lammers in the CW drama Containment. Bringing more than 3 decades of genre television experience and an instantly recognizable voice to the role of Kasusha, Claudia Black stands as one of the most seasoned and accomplished performers within the entire cast of House of Ashur. Ivana Bakuro, from child prodigy to Roman noblewoman's confidant. Ivana Bakuro, who plays Messia, holds the distinction of being one of the most celebrated child actresses in the history of Spanish cinema before she ever reached adulthood. Born Ivana Bakuro Macias on June 11, 1994, in Barcelona, Spain, to parents Ivan Bakuro and Julia Macias, she attended the American School of Barcelona, where she became fluent in Spanish, Catalan and English, a trilingual foundation that would later prove enormously valuable across her international career. She began acting professionally at the remarkably young age of 8, taking on small supporting roles in a trio of horror-related Spanish films, including Brian Yuzna's Rottweiler alongside legendary Spanish horror actor Paul Naschy, and Fragile, in which she appeared opposite American star Callista Flockhart. Bakuro's life changed dramatically in 2006 when acclaimed filmmaker Guillermo del Toro cast her, at just 11 years old, in the leading role of his dark fantasy masterpiece Pan's Labyrinth. The role of Ophelia had originally been written for an 8-year-old girl, but del Toro was so impressed by Bakuro's audition, in which she outperformed more than 1,000 other young actresses who tried out for the part, that the script was altered specifically to accommodate her age. Her performance in the film, which told the story of a young girl who escapes the horrors of Franco-era Spain through an imagined fairy tale world, earned overwhelming critical praise both within Spain and internationally. She became the youngest Spanish actress ever to win the prestigious Goya Award, taking home the trophy for Best New Actress at just 12 years old. In addition to the Goya, she also received the Best Newcomer Award from the Union of Spanish Actors, the Saturn Award for Best Performance by a Young Actor, and the Imogen Award for Best Actress, an extraordinary sweep of honors for someone so young. Following the massive success of Pan's Labyrinth, Bakuro continued working steadily while also completing her education, eventually graduating from the American School of Barcelona in 2012. She made her American film debut playing the lead role in the 2009 horror film The New Daughter, starring opposite Kevin Costner, and she went on to appear in the Spanish-British thriller Another Me alongside Rhys Ifans in 2013. In 2015, Bakuro traveled to New Zealand to film her role as Eritrea in the MTV fantasy series The Shannara Chronicles, based on the best-selling novels of Terry Brooks, a part for which producers reportedly saw more than 400 actresses before ultimately choosing her. The series ran for 2 seasons and further cemented her reputation as a compelling lead performer in genre television. She continued to balance acting with academic pursuits during this period, at various points undertaking law studies alongside her professional work. From 2019 to 2020 she starred as Eva Villanueva in the Netflix Spanish period drama High Seas, further showcasing her versatility. Reflecting on her unusual career path in interviews, Bakuro has spoken candidly about the challenges Hispanic actors sometimes face when transitioning from Spanish-language productions into English-speaking American and international projects, acknowledging that while Pan's Labyrinth opened extraordinary doors for her personally, many of her peers from Spain have had a far more difficult path. Her casting in Spartacus, House of Ashur represents yet another chapter in a career defined by an unusually early and dramatic breakthrough followed by decades of steady, thoughtful growth as a performer. Lee Gill, the distinctive character actor playing Satyrus. Lee Gill, who portrays Satyrus, one of the surviving members of the Ferox brothers, has carved out a distinctive and increasingly high-profile career built around his commanding screen presence despite standing at 4 feet tall due to dwarfism. Gill's childhood was shaped significantly by his father's career in the British Army, which meant the family relocated frequently, moving to a different town and enrolling in different schools roughly every 1 to 2 years throughout his upbringing. Rather than finding this disruptive, Gill has spoken about genuinely enjoying the constant change and new experiences that came with military family life. His interest in acting traces back to childhood, sparked by watching action films and dreaming of one day standing alongside stars like Arnold Schwarzenegger in big, larger-than-life productions. Gill made his first theatrical film appearance in the 2014 British Christmas comedy Get Santa, playing a character named Specs alongside established actors including Jim Broadbent, Rafe Spall and Warwick Davis. From there, his career began to build steadily through a combination of film and television work. In 2016 he took on the small but memorable role of Bob Ono in 3 episodes of HBO's globally massive fantasy series Game of Thrones, playing a member of a Braavosi acting troupe, a role that allowed him brief but valuable exposure on one of the biggest television productions in the world. That same year he also appeared as the Goblin bank teller Red in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, part of the broader Wizarding World franchise, contributing motion capture work to bring the character to life on screen with his voice provided separately by veteran actor Dan Hedaya. Gill's most significant breakthrough arrived in 2019 when he was cast as Gary Puddles in Todd Phillips's critically acclaimed and enormously successful film Joker, starring alongside Joaquin Phoenix. The role, which Gill has repeatedly cited as his favorite of his career, allowed him to portray a fundamentally decent, sympathetic person, a change of pace from many of the more villainous or comedic parts he had taken on previously. He has spoken warmly in interviews about the experience of working alongside Phoenix and director Phillips, describing it as an incredible overall experience. He went on to reprise the role in the 2024 sequel Joker, Folie à Deux, further extending his association with one of the most talked about franchises in modern cinema. In between these 2 films, Gill also appeared in an episode of the Netflix fantasy series The Witcher in 2019, playing a character known as One-Eyed Dwarf, and he took on a role in the 2024 World War II drama Blitz, playing a character named Mickey Davies. In a significant career milestone announced in September of 2025, it was revealed that Gill would portray Grip Hook in the upcoming HBO adaptation of the Harry Potter series, connecting him once again to the Wizarding World franchise but in a considerably more prominent role than his earlier appearance. His casting as Satyrus in Spartacus, House of Ashur adds yet another distinctive character to a filmography that has increasingly positioned him within some of the biggest fantasy and comic book franchises working today. Geordie Webber, the New Zealand musician turned actor playing Tarshan. Geordie Webber, who plays the volatile and ultimately redemptive character of Tarshan, brings a background rooted as much in music as in acting to Spartacus, House of Ashur. Webber, who is of Maori heritage, was born on May 25, 1994, in Rotorua, New Zealand. His entry into the entertainment industry actually began in music rather than acting, when in 2012, at the age of 17, he became a member of the New Zealand boy band Titanium, formed as part of a talent competition run by the country's popular radio station The Edge. The group achieved significant early success, with their debut single Come On Home reaching the #1 position on the New Zealand singles chart, and Titanium went on to become the first New Zealand band in history to have 3 singles charting in the top 40 simultaneously, a genuinely notable achievement for a group formed through a radio competition. During this period of early fame, Webber was also named Clio Cruiser Bachelor of the Year, a further sign of his rising public profile within New Zealand at the time. When the rest of Titanium relocated to the United States to pursue opportunities there, Webber made the decision to remain in New Zealand, officially departing the band in 2014 to pursue both a solo music career and, increasingly, acting. He released his debut solo single, I'll Be Loving You, in September of 2016. That same year marked his entry into scripted television when he was cast as Levi Weston, the Gold Ranger, in Power Rangers Ninja Steel, a Nickelodeon production that began airing in 2017 and gave Webber his first substantial exposure to an international audience of young viewers. Following the promotional commitments for that series, he appeared in the web series Oddly Even and Aotearoa, continuing to build his acting resume within the New Zealand industry. Webber went on to take a recurring role in the long-running New Zealand soap opera Shortland Street, playing the character Jake Morris, and he starred in the action horror series The Deadlands, playing the character Ringy, a production that allowed him to explore more dramatic and physically demanding material. From 2020 to 2021 he starred as Constable Cruz Kingi in the rugby drama series Head High, an experience he has credited with helping him reconnect more deeply with his own Maori culture and heritage. During this same period Webber also debuted a musical alter ego under the name Wuzza and the Vibes, releasing a self-titled EP in 2020 followed by the single Juice and Lemonade in 2021, describing the project as an alternative pop and roots-based musical outlet based in Auckland. His film and streaming credits continued to expand with the television film Together Forever Tea in 2021, the romantic holiday film Mistletoe Ranch in 2022, and a role in the interactive Netflix romantic comedy Choose Love. In 2023, Webber joined the cast of the popular Australian soap opera Home and Away, playing the character Kahu Parata, further extending his reach into the broader Australian and New Zealand television market. He also took on a role in the Australian television drama Prosper. His casting in Spartacus, House of Ashur as a series lead represented a significant step forward in his acting career, moving him from regional New Zealand and Australian productions into a major international co-production. Alongside acting, Webber has continued to describe himself as an actor, solo musician and motivational speaker, reflecting a multifaceted career that spans performance, music and public speaking in ways that mirror the broad skill set found throughout much of the House of Ashur cast. India Shaw-Smith, Jamaica Vaughan and the rest of the ensemble. Rounding out the principal cast, India Shaw-Smith plays Viridia, the grieving young Roman noblewoman and daughter of Casusha and Gabinius whose arc becomes deeply intertwined with Ashur's own journey throughout the season. A British actress with a strong personal love of history and period drama, Shaw Smith has spoken in interviews about how deeply connected she felt to the Roman setting even before landing the role, recalling childhood visits to historic estates and a lifelong fascination with stately homes and the past. Her career includes a lead role in the independent feature film The Pines Still Whisper, which won Best Film at the Toronto Independent Film Festival, along with television credits and productions including Vanity Fair, Supernatural, and Ander. She has described discovering she had booked the role of Viridia while alone in Los Angeles, recalling that she was overcome with emotion and unable to share the news with anyone back home in the United Kingdom because of the time difference. In discussing her character, Shaw Smith has emphasized Viridia's inner strength and moral compass, describing her as a woman shaped by love and loss rather than by violence, a rare point of genuine humanity within the brutal, scheming world the show otherwise portrays. Jamaica Vaughan plays Hilara, the shrewd household slave and quiet strategist who becomes deeply entangled in Ashur's personal and political life throughout the series. An Australian actress, Vaughan began performing as a child in school and youth theatre productions across Australia and New Zealand before eventually signing with professional representation. She built her craft gradually through stage work, short films and ongoing training in acting, singing and movement, developing a foundation in both classical technique and martial arts that she has brought to her screen work. Her earlier television credits include recurring and guest appearances in New Zealand and Australian productions such as Shortland Street, Step Dave, West Side, 800 Words, and the popular long-running soap opera Home and Away, in addition to film work including The Weight of Elephants. Also appearing in the series in a smaller but symbolically important role is Lucy Lawless, reprising her original Spartacus character of Lucretia for 2 episodes as the ghostly figure who sets the entire alternate timeline of the series into motion. Lawless, born Lucille Frances Ryan on March 29, 1968, in the Auckland suburb of Mount Albert, New Zealand, is one of the most recognizable figures in the history of genre television thanks to her legendary starring role in Xena, Warrior Princess, which ran from 1995 to 2001 and made her a global icon. Long before that fame, Lawless grew up as one of 7 children in a New Zealand household, discovered her love of performing at the age of 10, studied opera and jazz music, and even spent time traveling through Europe and Australia working as a grape picker and gold miner before eventually returning home and beginning her acting career in earnest. Her breakthrough came through a guest appearance on Hercules, The Legendary Journeys in 1994, which directly led to the creation of her own spin-off series the following year. Since then, Lawless has built an extraordinarily varied career including a recurring role on Battlestar Galactica, a starring role in STARZ's Ash vs. Evil Dead, and her original portrayal of Lucretia across the entire run of the first Spartacus series, making her brief return in House of Ashur a meaningful piece of continuity linking the new series back to its origins. Taken together, the ensemble cast of Spartacus, House of Ashur represents an extraordinary range of backgrounds, disciplines and career paths, from Lebanese immigrants and Scottish theatre veterans to Canadian martial artists, Spanish child prodigies, New Zealand pop musicians, and some of the most celebrated names in the history of cult science fiction and fantasy television. Every performer brought years, and in several cases decades, of hard-won experience to the brutal, politically charged world of Capua, and it is this combination of seasoned craft and genuine personal history that helps give the show's blood-soaked spectacle its surprising emotional weight. Spartacus, House of Ashur. The budget, the making, and the funniest moments caught behind the camera. Every great television spectacle has 2 stories running side by side. There is the story audiences see unfold on their screens, full of betrayal, bloodshed and political scheming, and there is the entirely different story of the actual human beings who spent months of their lives building that world brick by brick, sweating through New Zealand summers in heavy costumes, memorizing dense Shakespearean dialogue, and occasionally cracking each other up between takes so badly that scenes had to be res hot. Spartacus, House of Ashur is no exception. Behind the brutal arena battles and the poisoned wine and the whispered political conspiracies, there was an enormous, tightly coordinated production effort taking place in Auckland, New Zealand, staffed by hundreds of crew members and populated by a cast that, by nearly every account given in interviews, had an absolute blast making the show, even when the work itself was physically brutal. This piece takes a long, detailed look at how the show was actually made, what it likely cost to bring this world to life, and the funniest, most human moments that leaked out from behind the cameras during the production of the show's first, and, so far, only season. Building an empire in Auckland. Long before a single frame of Spartacus, House of Ashur reached a television screen, the production had to solve an enormous logistical puzzle, namely how to recreate the sprawling, sun-scorched world of ancient Roman Capua on the other side of the planet, in the southern hemisphere's city of Auckland, New Zealand. This was not a new challenge for the Spartacus franchise. The original series and its various prequels and sequels had all been filmed in and around New Zealand as well, taking full advantage of the country's combination of diverse natural landscapes, well-established studio infrastructure, and a deep bench of local crew members who had, by this point, spent well over a decade becoming experts in exactly the kind of large-scale, blood-soaked historical spectacle that the Spartacus name demands. Roughly 60% of the show's ensemble cast and background extras were sourced locally from within New Zealand itself, meaning the production leaned heavily on the country's homegrown acting and stunt community to fill out its enormous world of gladiators, senators, slaves, and soldiers. Principal photography on the first season officially began in July of 2024 and continued for slightly more than 3 months, wrapping in October of that same year. This gave the production roughly 14 to 15 weeks to shoot an entire 10-episode season, a demanding but fairly standard timeline for a premium cable drama of this scale and ambition. During this period, the crew constructed enormous, elaborate sets designed to convincingly recreate the streets, villas, arenas and battlefields of 1st century BC Rome, structures that needed to hold up not only visually on camera but also physically, given the sheer amount of stunt work, combat choreography and practical effects that would be happening on top of them, around them, and occasionally crashing directly into them. These sets became the backdrop for the vast majority of the show's outdoor sequences, giving the production a level of control over lighting, whether in continuity that would have been far more difficult to achieve if the crew had been forced to rely entirely on found locations scattered across the city. While Spartacus, House of Ashur has never had its exact production budget publicly disclosed by STARZ or Lionsgate Television, the show's overall scale, visual ambition and the sheer scope of its practical effects work strongly suggest a per-episode budget well into the multiple millions of dollars, consistent with what premium cable dramas in this general tier have historically spent on similarly effects-heavy, costume-intensive historical productions. The original Spartacus series, made over a decade earlier, was already known within the industry for punching well above its budgetary weight class, using clever practical effects, aggressive use of digital blood work, and stylized slow-motion combat to create the illusion of a much larger-scale spectacle than its actual budget likely allowed. House of Ashur appears to have followed a similar philosophy, investing heavily in areas that would have the most visible impact on screen, namely costuming, prosthetics, practical gore effects and full-scale set construction, while presumably working more efficiently in other areas behind the scenes. The show's below-the-line crew included a substantial production design team led by a supervising art director along with multiple additional art directors, a sizable costume department under costume designer Barbara Dara, and an extensive hair, makeup and prosthetics team that included a dedicated senior prosthetics artist, a senior hair and makeup artist and multiple additional prosthetics makeup artists working specifically to maintain the visceral, blood-drenched aesthetic the franchise is famous for. Sadly, Despite the clear financial and creative investment poured into the show, and despite a strong critical reception that saw the series open to an outstanding 100% approval rating from critics before eventually settling around the low 90s, STARZ made the difficult decision to cancel Spartacus, House of Ashur after just one season in May of 2026. According to industry reporting at the time, the cancellation came down primarily to a mismatch between the show's actual viewership and the specific audience demographic STARZ was hoping to build its broader slate around. Sources indicated that while House of Ashur delivered a genuinely diverse cast and storylines centered on women and underrepresented characters, consistent with the franchise's long-standing identity, the sword and sandal genre itself tends to skew toward a male-dominated, more traditionally structured viewership that did not fully align with the network's stated strategic priorities going forward. Following the cancellation, the rights to the series reverted to Lionsgate, which had by that point formally separated from STARZ as a corporate entity, and reports indicated that Lionsgate was actively shopping the show to other potential platforms and streaming services in hopes of continuing the story showrunner Stephen S. DeKnight had already mapped out scripts for. DeKnight himself had publicly stated, shortly after the season 1 finale aired, that he had already completed writing for a second season and felt genuinely confident heading into the renewal process, making the eventual cancellation a particularly bittersweet outcome for a creative team that had clearly poured everything they had into building this world. A cast that fell in love with their own set. One of the most consistent threads running through nearly every interview given by the cast of House of Ashur, whether speaking individually or as a group, is just how genuinely thrilled and, in some cases, emotionally overwhelmed several actors were simply by the experience of walking onto the finished sets for the first time. Jamie Slater, who plays the sharp-tongued and manipulative Cornelia, spoke candidly about the surreal nature of her first day visiting the production in Auckland, describing how she became unexpectedly emotional the moment she walked into the recreation of Ashur's villa. She explained that the experience felt like she had somehow been catapulted directly through her own television screen and into the physical world of a franchise she had genuinely loved as a fan long before she was ever cast in it. Slater has been open about the fact that she was already a devoted fan of the original Spartacus series from the moment it first premiered, which made the experience of stepping onto her own scenes within that same universe feel almost dreamlike, and by her own account she nearly could not process how real it all felt in the moment. India Shaw-Smith, who plays the grieving Roman noblewoman Viridia, shared a similarly touching and slightly mischievous story about one of her favorite memories from the production. On a day when she had already wrapped her own scenes early, rather than heading straight back to her trailer or leaving set for the day, Shaw-Smith snuck back onto the lot to watch Nick Tarabay and Graham McTavish film scenes together in the recreated streets of Capua. Members of the crew, apparently charmed by her enthusiasm, allowed her to climb up onto one of the rooftops of the constructed set so that she could quietly watch the two veteran actors work from an elevated vantage point without getting in the way of the shoot itself. She has described this as one of the most memorable behind-the-scenes moments of her entire time on the production, explaining that watching other actors work up close, especially performers with the experience and command of Tarabay and McTavish, taught her an enormous amount about the craft, and that sitting quietly on that rooftop while the cameras rolled below her is a memory she expects to carry with her for a long time. It is a small, almost childlike anecdote, a grown professional actress essentially playing hooky to go watch her castmates from a rooftop like a kid sneaking out to watch a parade, and it captures something genuinely sweet about the atmosphere on set. Graham McTavish, never one to shy away from a good story in interviews given his decades of experience across major franchises, offered some of the most entertaining commentary about the sheer joy of performing the show's uniquely stylized dialogue. Discussing the density and theatrical flourish of Stephen DeKnight's writing, McTavish compared the experience of speaking the show's heightened, almost Shakespearean language to making music, describing it as an opportunity to be simultaneously funny, witty and cutting all at once. He specifically praised Nick Tarabase's gift for delivering the show's elaborate insults, joking that it seemed as though Ashur must sit alone in his room every night composing devastating put-downs specifically so he would have a fresh one ready to deliver the next day on set. When the interviewer noted how impressive it was that the cast managed to snap back into ordinary modern speech patterns after spending entire days speaking in the show's flowery, archaic register, McTavish leaned enthusiastically into the bit, joking that it would actually be wonderful if he simply kept talking that way in his everyday life. Imagining aloud how delightfully strange it would be to order a morning coffee using the same ornate, formal language his character uses in the show. His co-star in that same conversation, Arlo Gibson, who plays the character Opiter, immediately played along, responding with a mock formal declaration of gratitude toward his own latte, sending the pair of actors into a playful riff about how every single mundane interaction, from ordering coffee to thanking someone for a small favor, could be dramatically improved by treating it with the same grandiose, theatrical weight the show's characters use when plotting against each other or preparing for mortal combat. It is exactly the kind of loose, easy chemistry between actors that tends to translate into genuine warmth on screen, and it says a great deal about the atmosphere McTavish and his fellow cast members cultivated together during the long months of production. The costumes, the heat, and physical reality of ancient Rome. Several members of the cast spoke at length about the genuinely transformative, and, at times, physically demanding experience of wearing the show's elaborate costuming for months on end. Jamie Slater, discussing her overall experience filming the series, singled out the costume department's work as one of the most enjoyable and physically informative aspects of the entire production, praising the beauty and craftsmanship of Cornelia's gowns while also acknowledging just how much simply wearing the costumes shaped her physical performance and posture throughout filming. This is a detail that comes up again and again across historical costume dramas, the idea that a truly well-designed costume does not simply sit on an actor's body but actively changes the way that actor moves, stands and carries themselves, effectively doing a portion of the character work before the actor even opens their mouth to deliver a line. For Tanika Davis, playing the show's groundbreaking gladiatrix Achillea, the physical demands of production went well beyond costuming into the realm of genuine athletic endurance and combat training. Davis has spoken candidly in interviews about the sheer intensity of preparing for and performing Achillea's extensive fight choreography, describing days that left her in real physical pain and genuine exhaustion by the time filming wrapped. Rather than treating this discomfort as something to be minimized or complained about, Davis has framed it as an essential and even welcome part of honoring the character, explaining that she used every ache and every bruise sustained during the demanding shoot as fuel for Achillea's on-screen rage, strength, and resilience, treating her own physical exhaustion almost as a direct channel into the character's emotional reality. Her years of competitive taekwondo training as a child in Ontario turned out to be an almost eerily perfect preparation for the role decades later, giving her both the physical conditioning and the mental discipline required to spend months performing dangerous, high-intensity stunt combat sequences on a near-daily basis. Actor Josh Marchant, who appears in the series as one of the many elite Romans populating the show's crowd and background scenes, offered one of the most charming and frequently quoted descriptions of the overall on-set atmosphere during filming. He described the entire production as feeling like a summer camp where everyone happened to be wearing togas, explaining that the cast and background performers barely needed any encouragement at all to enthusiastically cheer on the incredible stunt work being performed inside the recreated arena sets during filming. This image of dozens of costumed extras genuinely, spontaneously cheering for stunt performers between takes, not because a director instructed them to perform enthusiasm for the cameras but because the stunts themselves were simply that impressive to witness in person, captures something important about the collaborative, almost communal energy that seems to have defined much of the production. It suggests a set where the line between cast and crew blurred in the best possible way, with everyone genuinely invested in watching their colleagues pull off increasingly dangerous and elaborate physical feats. The dialogue that made everyone laugh. One of the most consistently mentioned sources of on-set amusement throughout multiple cast interviews involves the show's uniquely dense, theatrical dialogue style, a hallmark of DeKnight's writing that carried over directly from the original Spartacus series. Described by multiple interviewers and cast members alike as essentially Shakespearean but laced generously with modern profanity, the show's script requires actors to deliver long, ornately structured sentences full of formal, almost archaic vocabulary, often while simultaneously engaged in brutal physical combat or emotionally devastating confrontations. Getting this specific rhythm and register right takes considerable skill, and by numerous accounts, watching castmates nail, or occasionally fumble, particularly elaborate lines became a genuine source of ongoing amusement throughout the shoot. During one interview, showrunner DeKnight singled out a specific line delivered by Graham McTavish as one of his personal favorite moments from the entire season, not because the line itself was particularly dramatic or poetic on the page, but specifically because of the deadpan perfection of McTavish's delivery within the scene's context. The line in question, a simple and almost mundane-sounding phrase about attending to some men during a party sequence, becomes, according to DeKnight, an absolutely perfect comedic beat purely because of where it lands in the scene and the specific tone McTavish brings to it. DeKnight has noted that this kind of moment, where a seemingly unremarkable line becomes hilarious purely through timing and delivery, is exactly the sort of thing that can only really be appreciated once you see the finished scene, but that it became something of an inside joke among the writers and cast during production, repeated and quoted by crew members working nearby whenever the moment came up in conversation. Nick Tarabay himself has spoken about the particular joy of returning to Ashur's voice after more than a decade away from the character, describing the experience of stepping back into the role as one of the most delicious returns of his career. He has discussed in interviews how the character's elaborate, manipulative way of speaking essentially demands a kind of theatrical, almost musical approach to line delivery, and how finding that rhythm again after so many years away took some rediscovery but ultimately came back to him with surprising ease once filming began. Graham McTavish, reflecting on working alongside Tarabay specifically, praised his co-star's gift for delivering the show's most vicious insults with such precision and comedic timing that it became something the rest of the cast genuinely looked forward to on days when Ashur had a particularly cutting verbal takedown scripted into the scene. According to McTavish, watching Tarabay deliver these elaborate insults during rehearsal or blocking, well before the cameras were even rolling for a proper take, would frequently draw genuine laughter from the surrounding cast and crew, turning what might otherwise have been a fairly routine rehearsal into something closer to a live comedic performance. Building relationships off-screen that mirrored the show. Interestingly, several actors have described how the genuine off-screen friendships and working relationships they built during production ended up directly informing and enriching their on-screen chemistry, blurring the line between the professional camaraderie of a working cast and the complicated, often fraught relationships their characters share within the story itself. Graham McTavish and Arlo Gibson, who play the tightly bonded Dr. Chorus and the doomed Lanista Opiter respectively, spoke together about how their real-life rapport helped ground the emotional weight of their characters' relationship, which develops from a wary professional connection into something considerably deeper before being cut brutally short within the story. The two actors' easy, joking chemistry during their joint interview, complete with McTavish's riffing about speaking in flowery Roman dialogue during everyday life and Gibson immediately playing along with a mock formal toast to his coffee, reflects exactly the kind of genuine, spontaneous friendship that tends to translate naturally into believable on-screen intimacy between characters. Jamaica Vaughn, who plays the sharp, quietly strategic Hilara, has spoken about the camaraderie she shared specifically with Ivana Bakuro, who plays Messia, given that their characters share a close, complicated bond within the story that involves loyalty, jealousy, and unspoken romantic tension. The genuine warmth between the two actresses off-screen appears to have given their scenes together an added layer of authenticity, since their characters' relationship requires a level of intimacy, and trust that can be considerably harder to fake convincingly on camera without a real foundation of comfort and rapport between the performers themselves. Costume malfunctions, weather woes, and the unpredictable nature of outdoor filming. Given that a substantial portion of Spartacus, House of Ashur was filmed on large, elaborately constructed outdoor sets designed to recreate the sun-scorched streets and arenas of ancient Capua, the production inevitably had to contend with the genuinely unpredictable nature of New Zealand's weather during the July through October filming window, a period that falls during New Zealand's winter and early spring months, creating a fairly significant irony given that the finished show is meant to depict the blazing heat of a Roman summer. Cast members filming elaborate outdoor arena sequences and street scenes, often dressed in minimal period-appropriate costuming or heavy gladiatorial armor, had to contend with considerably cooler and occasionally rainy conditions than the sun-drenched Mediterranean setting the show portrays on screen, requiring careful continuity management from the costume and production design departments to maintain the illusion of oppressive Roman heat even when the actual temperature on set told a very different story. This kind of behind-the-scenes contradiction, actors sweating through heavy period costuming meant to suggest scorching Italian summer heat, while actually shivering slightly in the cooler air of an Auckland winter, is exactly the sort of quietly absurd production reality that rarely makes it into official marketing materials but tends to come up naturally whenever cast members are asked candidly about their day-to-day experience filming. The show's extensive use of practical blood and gore effects, a defining hallmark of the Spartacus franchise since its earliest episodes, also created its own steady stream of on-set chaos and, by multiple accounts, genuine amusement among the cast. With a dedicated senior prosthetics artist, a senior hair and makeup artist, and multiple additional prosthetics makeup artists working specifically on generating the show's signature stylized bloodshed, the production reportedly went through an enormous quantity of fake blood and prosthetic gore across the 10-episode season. A detail that came up specifically when cast members were asked in one joint interview to estimate just how much blood and viscera the show had used over the course of filming. While an exact figure was never pinned down definitively in the conversation, the cast's collective reaction, described as a mixture of laughter and slightly stunned disbelief at the sheer scale of the question, speaks to just how omnipresent the show's practical gore effects were throughout the shoot, with actors frequently finding themselves drenched, splattered or otherwise covered in some combination of fake blood between nearly every take of the show's more violent sequences. The emotional toll and the genuine bonds that carried the cast through it. Despite the demanding physical and emotional nature of the material, nearly every actor interviewed about their time on House of Ashur has emphasized just how genuinely supportive and close-knit the overall cast and crew dynamic became over the course of the roughly 3.5-month shoot. Jamie Slater specifically credited the people she worked alongside as one of the most enjoyable aspects of the entire production, explaining that beyond the impressive costuming and the emotional thrill of stepping into a franchise she had loved as a fan, it was ultimately the relationships she built with her fellow cast members that made the experience so memorable. This sentiment echoes across numerous other interviews given throughout the show's press cycle, with actors repeatedly circling back to the same basic idea, that despite months of grueling physical work, complicated emotional material and the general unpredictability of a large-scale international television production, the cast genuinely enjoyed each other's company and built real friendships that extended well beyond their professional obligations to promote the finished show. This sense of camaraderie appears to have been particularly important given just how emotionally demanding much of the show's material actually is. Several of the season's central storylines involve devastating loss, betrayal and grief, requiring actors like Graham McTavish and Jordi Weber to access genuinely painful emotional territory in scenes involving character deaths and shattered relationships. Having a supportive, tightly bonded cast environment surrounding that kind of heavy emotional work appears to have made a meaningful difference in how the actors were able to process and deliver those performances, with the same sense of playful, easy humor that defines so many of the show's lighter behind-the-scenes moments, also serving as something of an emotional pressure valve during the shoot's more intense and demanding days. Looking back on a short but memorable production. Even though Spartacus, House of Ashur was ultimately cancelled after just a single 10-episode season, the overwhelming impression left by cast interviews conducted throughout its production and subsequent press cycle is one of genuine joy, camaraderie, and creative fulfillment among nearly everyone involved. From India Shaw Smith sneaking onto a rooftop to watch her castmates work, to Graham McTavish and Arlo Gibson riffing about ordering lattes and flowery Roman dialogue, to Jamie Slater's emotional first steps into a recreated version of the show she grew up loving, to Tanika Davis channeling every bruise and ache from grueling stunt work directly into Achilles' on-screen ferocity. The picture that emerges from behind the scenes of House of Ashur is one of a genuinely happy, hard-working set built on real affection between its performers. Showrunner DeKnight has publicly stated that both the cast and crew were eager to return to New Zealand for a second season before the show's ultimate cancellation, a detail that speaks volumes about just how positive the overall production experience seems to have been for everyone involved, even knowing, in hindsight, that this particular chapter of the story would not get the chance to continue. Whatever the future holds for the franchise and for this specific incarnation of Ashur's twisted rise to power, the evidence from behind the camera suggests that the people who built this world together, brick by brick and blood splatter by blood splatter, genuinely loved doing it. Spartacus, House of Ashur. The cultural and historical details behind the show, explained in full. Spartacus, House of Ashur presents itself as an alternate history, a bold what-if scenario that reimagines the fate of one of the original franchise's most notorious villains. But underneath its fictional premise, the show is deeply rooted in genuine historical detail, drawing on real figures, real institutions, real social structures, and even real archaeological evidence in ways that go far beyond simple set dressing. Understanding where the show draws directly from documented history, where it bends the truth for dramatic purposes, and where it invents entirely fictional elements gives viewers a much richer appreciation of everything happening on screen. This piece takes a long, detailed look at the historical and cultural foundations underpinning the world of House of Ashur, examining everything from the real Roman politicians woven into its plot to the genuinely fascinating and largely forgotten history of female gladiators that directly inspired its most groundbreaking character. The historical setting: Rome in the aftermath of the Third Servile War. To understand the world of House of Ashur, it helps to first understand exactly where and when the show takes place within the broader arc of Roman history. The events of the show are set in the immediate aftermath of the Third Servile War, the massive slave uprising led by the historical gladiator Spartacus that shook the Roman Republic to its core between 73 and 71 BC. This rebellion, which began with a relatively small breakout of gladiators from a training school in Capua, eventually swelled into an army of tens of thousands of escaped slaves who defeated multiple Roman military forces before finally being crushed by the wealthy Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus. The city of Capua itself, where House of Ashur is set, holds genuine historical significance as the real location of the gladiatorial school from which the historical Spartacus and his fellow gladiators originally escaped, making it a fitting and historically grounded backdrop for a story about the world of gladiators and Roman spectacle in the years immediately following that uprising. This period of Roman history, often referred to as the Late Roman Republic, was one of the most turbulent and transformative eras in the ancient world. The traditional republican system of government, built around annually elected consuls, a powerful senate, and various checks and balances designed to prevent any single individual from accumulating too much personal power, was beginning to strain under the weight of ambitious, wealthy, and increasingly popular military leaders who commanded personal loyalty from their soldiers in ways that traditional republican institutions were poorly equipped to control. This was the exact era that would, within a few short decades, give rise to civil war and the eventual collapse of the Republic itself, replaced by the autocratic rule of the Roman Empire. House of Ashur situates its fictional story precisely within this volatile transitional period, using the personal, invented drama of Ashur's rise to power as a lens through which audiences can observe the much larger, genuinely historical forces reshaping Roman society during this pivotal era.